We have Rebecca Shelton here talking about a presentation she gave actually last month here in Canyon, Texas for our 56th Symposium of the Southwestern Federation of Archaeological Societies. And she is here to talk to us about the Lithic procurement sites, the Capricorn Ridge Wind Project area. And with that, I will give the floor to you.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be able to share this presentation with a larger audience, and I hope that the research can be used by others and to collaborate and get more ideas about the region itself. This talk presents some updates to research I conducted as a staff archaeologist at a private consulting firm. Although I have been formally trained as a ceramicist, it was this project that helped develop my appreciation for the study of procurement sites and lithic resources in Texas. Between 2007 and 2008, a series of bedrock lithic procurement sites were identified at the northwestern edge of the Edwards Plateau during intensive pedestrian surveys for the Capricorn Ridge Wind Plant Project area in Coke and Sterling counties. The Edwards Plateau in Central Texas is a massive formation that is recognized as an excellent resource of chert that is utilized in making stone tools. Lithic resources within this broad region are much more discontinuous, as this map implies, though. Here is a more detailed map of the physiographic regions. The project area is south of the Callahan Divide, shown here between the two rivers, and that red circled area. As early as the Paleo-Indian period, Native Americans were collecting material and manufacturing stone tools from this formation. Procurement sites have been recorded as unique locales in Texas since as early as 1929. The intensive survey was conducted on 2 large tracts of privately owned land, ranch land, as seen here. And within this 146 square mile study area, approximately 6,000 acres were surveyed. The surveys focused on access roads, collector lines, transmission line corridors, and 576 2-acre turbine pad sites. These turbines were oriented in linear strings across the landscape, which provided an excellent cross-sectional view of the terrain. Although the land was relatively undeveloped before the installation of the wind turbines and their supporting infrastructure, the ranches had been subjected to extensive brush clearing programs in the 1960s and the 1970s. Invasive plants such as mesquite, juniper, and prickly pear were removed with the use of bulldozers and chains, which not only disturbed the topsoil, but impacted the exposed chert and limestone outcrops on the ridges and slopes. Bedrock was exposed on the surface throughout the area, and thin clay loams are in the uplands away from the ridge edges. However, as a result of this survey, we recorded in our linear studies 26 lithic procurement sites within that 146 square mile area, and those sites are indicated by the red triangles as seen here. These sites were recorded on ridge tops, slopes, and in the headwaters of the valleys and draws on the upland divide between the Colorado and North Concho rivers. Edwards chert occurs in 3 forms: flat disc-shaped nodules, which is the most common, irregular nodules that cut across bedded plains, continuous beds, which are the least common and maybe up to 50 centimeters thick. At Capricorn Ridge, chert exposures were bedded or nodular, with a bedded chert more prevalent on the slopes and the nodular chert on the ridge tops. Due to the locations in the contiguous geological formation, the chert outcrops were found between elevations of 2,500 and 2,600 feet above mean sea level. Chert was throughout the survey area, but it was readily apparent to us after our initial surveys that the outcrops and exposures contained the outcrops that contained higher quality fine grain chert were selected for procurement. And these yellow arrows indicate where these exposures were occurring on those valley walls and the mesa tops. And another just view of the landscape that we were surveying. And so a little bit of history on the previous investigations. Within Coke and Sterling counties, previous investigations identified numerous sites, including procurement sites, campsites, cairn burials, and other lithic production areas. These include Of course, Duthet's 70 thesis work along the North Concho River. There was a large survey conducted by Texas Historical Commission stewards and members of the Concho Valley Archaeological Society in the Walnut Creek Valley, which is due east of our project area. Additionally, hundreds of diagnostic points were reported during the investigations of campsites, middens, rock shelters, and procurements for the E.V. Spence Reservoir in the 1960s and 1970s. Darrell Priel conducted excavations in west central Texas, which included survey and mitigation of burned rock middens. Between just these 3 studies, over 200 sites are reported, and most of them were described as campsites or occupation areas. In the 1990s, Christopher Lentz et al. With Mariah Associates conducted survey and then limited testing and monitoring at several procurement sites along the OHIV pipeline route in Sterling, Concho, Tom Green, Glasscock, and Midland counties. These testing efforts provided great insight into the procurement activities, and they even identified localized napping station at several of those sites. So a brief overview about what occurs at a lithic procurement site and what kind of byproducts or material that we would find versus what you would see at say a campsite or a habitation site. So there's a variety of ways that stone tools are manufactured, from direct to indirect percussion. And in order to kind of stay regionally consistent, we use terminology in our studies and our analysis, our infield analysis, the typology that was used at the E.V. Spence Reservoir. Hammerstones are hard materials such as quartzite, which were used to work the chert. And you may have seen modern knappers using antlers to finish the edge points as well. And you'll sometimes see these in cache toolkits and artifact assemblages. And while field diagnostic points are found at these lithic procurement sites, which is also what we did not find many diagnostics during our investigations, despite the extensive number of sites we recorded, there are clues in the core technology that help identify time periods. So in order to create large fluted points, such as Clovis points, the production process has to start with large, thin flakes. These polyhedral blade cores are temporally distinctive. And other artifacts that make up procurement sites are, of course, flakes. The majority of the assemblages that we found, and you would expect at a lithic procurement site, are primary flakes, with some secondary and very few, if any, tertiary. The smaller interior flakes associated with bending bifaces or retouching points are typically found at campsites where the finer stages of production and the final stages will occur. Here's an image of that polyhedral blade core that is distinctive. And during our survey, we did find actually some of those large, thin flakes that are byproducts of this kind of napping technology. Artifact assemblages from the Capricorn Ridge procurement sites did include various stages of cores, thick, thin, and broken bifaces in a wide range of sizes, cortex covered lithic debris, and occasionally chipped stone unifacial tools, such as scrapers, or in the rare case, some broken points. In this area, most of the chert was similar in color and composition to the Edwards Plateau chert found along the bluffs of the Concho River, northwest of San Angelo and southwest of the study area. The colors range from light gray, grayish brown, obviously dark gray, and grayish brown. There was some light brown, yellow, or very pale brown, and there was one particular site that had a very striking outcrop that was pink or light reddish brown, and it wasn't from heat treatment. It was the chert itself. In 1947, interestingly enough, Cyrus Ray also recorded similar peak chert in a mountain outcrop in nearby or neighboring Taylor County. Some of the chert was flecked with white or light gray spots, and few examples that we recorded were banded, but the majority was solid in color and semi-translucent. Chert throughout the area appeared to represent a large variability in quality. And just to speak briefly about this slide, many of the sites that recorded had not only extensive, discarded cores and lithic debris such as flakes, but some of the sites had many discarded bifaces, and as you can see, some of them were really quite large, as you can see in the image in the lower left-hand corner. So they were really selecting for the best quality material that they were finding at these locations. The variability was throughout the area, and we could tell that they were selecting for high quality because there were outcrops of chert that were never, they weren't utilized, and they didn't have, material, cultural material on them. So they were selecting for that high quality, and we could tell because there was absence of the work material, and there was absence of the work material in many of those chert outcrops versus the ones that we recorded to sites that had high densities of cobbles, flakes, bifaces. The distinction that we made during the survey regarding nappability was good, fair, or poor, and we recorded that in our site descriptions and the discussions in the landscape. The best description to qualify these distinctions was in the observable texture, such as fine versus coarse of the chert itself. Poor quality chert was porous and had flaws or inclusions. These types of flaws are not conducive to tool manufacturing, and we found many examples of tested and discarded cores from numerous stages of reduction throughout the survey. Selective use of chert is apparent at Capricorn Ridge procurement sites, where we discovered numerous outcrops of poor quality chert that had been passed over. So as you saw in the previous slide, this was just an image of the abundance of the bifaces. In order to qualify what we were looking for, we used the terminology of biface thick 1, 2, or thin 1 and 2, following the definitions used for the investigations at OH-Ivy Reservoir. There was a broad range in size, and those sites ranged from less than 100 meters to over 180,000 square meters. Those larger ones basically covered the entire mesa out surfaces and down into the slopes. The artifact density at the sites also ranged widely, and in order to get some estimates, we recorded a couple of square meter areas at a few of the sites. Since this was a reconnaissance survey, we did not have opportunity to go back and test in any of the sites as they had done. They were able to do, Mariah Associates was able to do. And so we focused on trying to make distinctions between these sites on the presence or absence of bifaces. And the reason we focused on this is because we can compare it to some other studies that were done by Austin Toms. Despite the number of sites recorded and the extensive amount of ground cover, only 2 broken diagnostic points were recovered or recorded, a Gower Dark point and a Marshall point. These procurement sites were compared with other similar sites that had been previously recorded in the 2 river valleys. And there is a clear pattern of site distribution within the formation. The procurement sites are interrelated by geology, yet they're also within the same advantageous resource area readily available to those 2 major river drainages on the Edwards Plateau and the rolling plains, and adjacent to the rolling plains ecotone. The upland divide between these 2 rivers is heavily dissected by tributaries which have formed ridges that trend to the north and south, many of which are spring fed. Despite that, this was a due diligence survey due to the density of procurement sites recorded. As I noted earlier, we did go back and conduct some limited testing in several 1 meter areas at 2 sites. And our counts there suggested that the artifact, or indicated that the artifact density per square meter at all of the sites was much higher than had been accounted for during our reconnaissance survey and field observation. In the Callahan Divide, approximately 70 miles northwest of the Capricorn Ridge, Austin Toms and crew conducted several tests at 41 TA181, where they counted lithic debris at this large procurement site in an attempt to characterize the material left behind versus what was collected and modified and taken for use later on. So when we compare the cultural material reported at the Capricorn Ridge sites to Tom's results, it's easy to suggest that hundreds of thousands of artifacts, primarily lithic debris from the initial stages of the procurement process, were identified during the survey. Tom succinctly states that it is difficult to determine the material removed from the region versus the amount of the material left behind when analyzing these sites. Even a broader regional comparison of material deposited at campsites along the Concho and Colorado rivers provides us only a glimpse of the chert removed from the procurement sites. And that, once again, this is the study area shown over the Edwards Formation between the two rivers. And you can see that's quite a large contiguous area of that Edwards chert. Furthermore, so when we compared our research area to the other sites that had been reported to date, and there's probably some more that we can add to this, those blue squares are the previously recorded sites. And of course, that's overlain with the red triangles, which are the sites that we reported during our surveys. So since we had not done a block survey, we had done linear surveys, one can only imagine the density of procurement areas and sites out there if that entire formation was surveyed. The studies of the Callahan Divide clearly demonstrate that the best example of the amount of material quarried is to take into account the time span of diagnostic artifacts identified throughout these sites in an attempt to qualify the amount of artifacts discarded at the sites themselves. And we can do that from some of the counts that were conducted by Ryan Associates, an Olson Tom study on the Callahan Divide, and even our one little piddly 1 meter square areas that we had done at a couple of sites during our survey. The procurement sites near the Callahan Divide appeared to have been quarried for at least 9,000 years. Tom's study and our sample counts taken at 41 ST 151 and 41 CK 266 suggests that hundreds of thousands of artifacts could be present at each of the procurement sites, and that possibly millions of pieces of work material had been removed over 10,000 plus years. The lack of diagnostics recorded was not surprising because artifact assemblages from current sites do not typically contain diagnostics. Yet campsites were reported in the drainage valleys, and one would anticipate dart or arrow points to be present within those landscapes and in those settings. So 2 lines of reasoning can be suggested. Either the landscape was used for hunting activities and the collection of chert or permanent campsites, or the final stages of tool production occurred were along the North Concho and Colorado rivers. Second, the area has been heavily collected since the mid-19th century. And finally, or as Chris Lentz has suggested, chert procurement was an embedded strategy during hunting four-ways, and you would not expect to find assemblages associated with habitation at procurement sites, but more the collection, the manufacturing, and the work areas or napping stations. Finally, based on occupation evidence from previous investigations conducted on those watersheds and the limited testing conducted at the campsites in North Concho and the Colorado River valleys, there is strong evidence of intensive occupation during the Archaic and late prehistoric periods in this region. In addition, lithic procurement activities, lithic production, and of course, hunting and food processing was occurring within the river valleys and in the spring bed draws. But previous researchers have suggested that exploitation of lithic resources within the Llano Estacado on the northwestern edge of the Edwards Plateau occurred within 25 to 220 miles of campsites or settlement sites. The variation in distance was attributed to procurement during different time periods, with further distances being attributed to the Folsom period, and shorter distances, say, to the late prehistoric. High quality lithic resources are limited in the Llano Estacado, and Johnson and Holliday assert that the model that this type of resource was imported from greater distances than other resources such as food and water. The sites identified during the large area surveys discussed in this article support this model procurement and distribution. In addition, lithic resources were imported from the Edwards Limestone Formation in central Texas to the southern High Plains. Caches of Edwards chert bifaces have been recorded throughout the South Texas plains and as far north as southeastern Colorado. In addition to these lines of evidence, Chris Lentz has documented over 300 caches and traced possible trade routes that stem from sites recorded in this formation. Further investigations, including chert sourcing studies, will continue to contribute to a better understanding of the breadth of distribution, of trade, of stone tools from this large natural resources. I'd like to acknowledge the crew and that I work with and the staff, Dr. Ellen Skinner, for the opportunity to lead the surveys for this amazing this study. And here are several members of our crew, not pictured are Sonny Wheeler, Bill Stivers, but from to the left is Cody Davis, Brett Lang, and Jeff Craver. Thank you.